This is the last panel on the Internet of Things, and we're going to start with the keynote with Aral Barkan, which is working on the indie project, and which will present why we should decentralize everything.
Thank you. Thank you to the 12 of you who stayed as well. I appreciate it. So the number 85 was a rather unremarkable number until last year when Oxfam, a charity that fights poverty, released a report with quite a staggering statistic that 85 people have as much wealth as half of the world's population. So that's as much wealth as 3.5 billion people. Now, 85 is easy to visualize. It's under the Dunbar number. 85 people would fit into one double-decker bus in London. I challenge you to visualize 3.5 billion people. You can't. We're not biologically wired to be able to. And that, in a nutshell, is systemic inequality. And systemic inequality is one of the existential challenges faced by our species. So let's say that you are one of the 85. What should you do? Well, I think it would be prudent to build some walls around you, preferably really thick and tall walls, just to make sure that you're protected from everyone else who might want a little bit of what you have. And the other thing that you should probably do is to keep an eye on the rest of us so that, to make sure we're not up to no good. And we're usually okay with this because if you think about it, most of us already harbor under the mass delusion that there is an all-seeing white guy who lives on a cloud and knows everything about us. So it's not necessarily too much of a leap to assume that we'd be all right with another, quite possibly less magical, all-seeing white guy who lives on a cloud and knows everything about us. Of course, there is no cloud. There are only other people's computers, as the Free Software Foundation will tell you. And what about these computers? We call them server farms. But what exactly is being farmed? What is the business of companies like Google and Facebook that have these server farms? I'll cut to the chase. You're all probably aware. It's us. We are the product. We are what's being farmed. Not our bodies. That's not what's being sold. We've moved beyond that, thankfully, these days. But everything else about us that makes us who we are. Now, in the past, of course, there was a time that we did sell people's bodies. We called that slavery. That's in the past. But I do believe that we're at a point where we have to ask ourselves the rather uncomfortable question of what do we call the business of selling everything else about a person that makes them who they are. And what we're building, the real issue behind this that I have is the stuff that we're building is really valuable. I don't know how many of you know of Spritz. It's a new startup. Well, they were new last year. Anyone heard of them? Watch the screen. If you're watching the middle bit, and if you can read that, you're reading at about 250 words per minute right now. It's a new way of reading. It's probably the first new way of reading since reading. This is awesome, right? This is an awesome piece of technology. So I was talking to their CEO at a conference called Thinking Digital in Newcastle last year at dinner, and I said, this is awesome, this is wonderful. What's your business model? That's my little question that I ask whenever I meet a startup. And he said, well, he looked at me actually like I was rather daft. And he said, well, we know what you're reading. But that's not the worst bit. Previously, he told me that they were very excited because they found in empirical testing that for people with dyslexia, this let them read easier and better. So think about what that says to someone with dyslexia. It says either choose to have whatever you read be read by us also, or read worse. I believe we can do better than this. So how do we, if we're in that 85, let's say, collect this data? Well, we have standard ways, right? We have services. Google started out as a single service. Now it's a plethora of services. And services are great, and we can opt out of services if we want to. Let's say we can. Let's say that there isn't a monopoly of a certain business model that we can't opt out of, actually. Let's say we can. There are also devices. So there are beautiful, gorgeous devices, for example, that Google has, like these Nexus phones. And what's really beautiful about these is you sign into them with your Google username and password. So beyond that point, it doesn't really matter which service you use. Google will still get some valuable data about you because we've made your sign-in to your device your Google username and password. But we can go beyond this as well, right? We can do better than this. We can provide people with connectivity. So through Google Fiber, for example, which you sign into the internet with your one Google account. Now, this is great because this means that we've made your sign-in to the internet your Google username and password. So at this point, it doesn't matter what device you use. We can still get some valuable information about you. And that's really important to us at Google because that's how we make money, right? We sell that information about you. We sell you. You're the product. And I saw a table earlier talking about the next 5 billion, I believe. And this is something we're very excited about in Silicon Valley, the next 5 billion. And we're going to reach them as well. Now, these are people, who's not familiar with the term? Anyone here not familiar with the term? Some? Yeah? So the next 5 billion are people in places that we probably haven't been to personally who are quite disenfranchised and can't get on the internet. So we're going to bring them the internet. And we're going to do that with things like balloons and satellites and drones. But there are terms and conditions attached. It's not the actual internet we're going to bring them. We're going to bring them a subset of the internet, kind of like an AOL version of the internet, controlled by us. But I'm sure they'll feel happy, to have something, right? We've done this in the past, right? The white man brings the fire. They're just terms and conditions attached. These days, the terms and conditions are slightly longer and nobody reads them. So you might be thinking, if this is the business model, and this is the business model of mainstream technology, why aren't these companies in some way regulated? Because we had this in the Industrial Revolution, after the Industrial Revolution, right? We were destroying the environment left, right, and center. Until at one point, some of us went, wait a minute, if we keep doing this, we're not going to have a habitat. So maybe we shouldn't cut down the Amazon rainforest in full. And so we brought regulations in. Well, the reason they're not being regulated is very, very simple. Because the very people, like Neelie Kroes, for example, who was part of the EC, vice president, who should be regulating them, are acting like cheerleaders for Silicon Valley. Her latest gig is Dutch special envoy for startups, and she was cheerleading for them in her position in the EC as well. Our latest digital commissioner compared people who care about net neutrality to the Taliban. So this is why these companies are not being in any way regulated, because haha business, right? It's great. It's great for our pocketbooks. So we call these public-private partnerships. We call it multi-stakeholderism. Now, the thing about multi-stakeholderism is it sounds great until you realize that not all stakes are created equal. Some of them are so big, as I saw at the Internet Governance Forum last year, that you can actually erect a tent around it, like Google had outside. They had a big tent, and they were the only ones who did. And we call it co-regulation. So inviting these companies to the table to say, hey, Google, come to the table. And Google's like, sure, yeah, awesome. I'll even pay for the table. Don't worry about it. And then we say, how should we regulate you? On privacy, for example. And they go, well, we have some ideas about that. Let's talk over dinner. We'll pay for that too. And we call it these things when actually there's a term that describes it beautifully. It's a term by Lawrence Lessig, and it's called institutional corruption. It is the effect of corporate finance on public decision-making. And this is what makes it impossible for us to regulate these companies in the current climate. And we are almost on the brink of codifying this into law. I don't know how many of you are aware of secretive trade deals like TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Sounds awesome. What it is the final step in the transfer of power from governments to corporations. Now, notice what's not mentioned in this equation, because there is a third party that we don't talk about. We talk about the dichotomy of governments and corporations. We miss out a very important third party, individuals. We miss out a very important third concept, democracy and democratic instruments. So these secretive trade deals, like TTIP, have investor-state dispute settlement clauses. And what these allow is they give, effectively, corporations veto rights over decisions that democratically elected governments have taken to protect their citizens. For example, in Canada, the Canadian government has paid out more than $200 million to tobacco companies because of decisions that it took to limit their influence because they wanted to protect the health of their citizens. This was good for the health of their citizens. This was bad for the investors of the tobacco companies. Now, some of you might be thinking, I run a corporation. Well, guess what? So do I. It's the only thing I've ever done. I've never worked for anyone else. I've never worked for government. I've always run my own show. But I hope we won't be so short-sighted to forget that we are individuals first and everything else later, and that the decisions that we take will affect us and the people that we love as well. No matter how much money you have, you will not be able to insulate them from certain impacts of the decisions that we're taking today. I personally see this as a war. I see it as a war on the public sphere. I see it as a war on the commons. And I see it as a war on our human rights and our individual freedoms. In essence, I see it as a war on democracy. So that's the problem. And if we leave it here, it's quite a depressing place to leave it. And you will probably all hate me and say, I wish you hadn't done this talk. Or ignore it, which could happen. But what's the solution? The solution is actually really quite simple, as most things are at their roots. I'm a designer, that's what I do. I try to find the root of a problem, to find the correct problem to solve before I solve it. Most people think design is about how you solve a problem. No. It's about finding the right problem to solve and understanding its nature. We usually get that wrong, and we spend a lot of time solving the wrong problems. So the solution is greater democracy, that thing that we don't talk about. Not more government, not more power to corporations, greater democracy, stronger democratic instruments that give us individuals greater control over our lives. And there is, I think, reason to be hopeful. If you look in Iceland, for example, and I know that they're an edge case, the Pirate Party currently in the polls is the most popular party. This gives me a huge amount of hope that a different way is possible. But if we're going to get there, we first have to get rid of institutional corruption. Unless we can remove corporate finance from public decision-making, none of the rest of it matters, really. Lawrence Lessig gets this. If you haven't seen his work, if you haven't read about it, please do. To do that, I personally believe that we really need to move beyond capitalism. Because what we call capitalism today, it's told to be about free markets. We're told that it's about competition. But really, what it's about today is monopolies. And if we're going to solve the problem that we're faced with, systemic inequality, we really need to move beyond monopolies. So technology can be part of the solution. And I was really glad to hear one of the other speakers mention this. But part of. First of all, we need to alter our relationship or how we understand technology. Because currently, we harbor under kind of a Steve Krug-style system of technology as the butler. If you haven't read his book, Don't Make Me Think. Please do. It's a great book on design in general. So this is how we see technology. There's us, very happy little man or woman. And there's our technology. We tell it what to do, and it says, sure. That's the butler analogy. Now, in this analogy, if, for example, there is surveillance, state or corporate, it's not great, but it's signals capture between two actors. All right, I can kind of live with that, let's say. This is how I see our relationship to technology being. When I, for example, jot down a thought on my phone, I'm not telling another actor to do something for me. I am actually extending myself. That is an extension of myself. Now, if that's the case, then we can question whether or not we can draw the boundaries of the self to include the technologies by which we extend ourselves. Now, this is a really important distinction, because now let's look at what surveillance looks like. If someone tries to intercept the message between myself and myself, that is an intrusion into the self. And we already have a body of laws that we've built up over many years that know how to deal with that sort of intrusion. And we know that it's something we don't really want. Today, it's not too far of a stretch to say that we are cyborgs. Not that we extend our bodies, we implant ourselves with technology, but we extend our abilities, our biological abilities, through technology. So maybe it's time we started thinking in those terms and extended human rights, person rights, to the technologies with which we extend ourselves. And maybe it's time we begun to understand that we, as individuals, not governments, not corporations, but as individuals, should have ownership and control over what is essentially our digital selves. Because I hear these terms, data, the new natural resource, the new oil. What a horrible thing. Because if you think about it, our personal data is us. If I have enough of it, I can simulate you. We call them profiles today. As they get higher and higher in fidelity, and as they become real-time as they are somewhat today, what they really become are simulations of you. Not your body, but everything else. But it's a simulation of you that you do not own. And you have to ask yourselves how comfortable you are with a corporation that has a simulation of you, that can keep it locked up in their little lab and run tests on it 24/7, because that's what we're doing today. So data isn't the new oil. Data is people, and we need to protect people. So technology can be part of the solution. Technology, as Melvin Kranzberg says, is neither good nor bad, nor, essentially, this is the important bit, neutral. So technology is an amplifier. It's a multiplier. It gives us an implementation orders of magnitude of what we feed it in philosophy and ideology. So in this case, throwing more technology at the problem without changing the nature of the technology is not going to fix the problem. It's only going to multiply it. We need to change its nature. As Marshall McLuhan says, we shape our tools, and then our tools shape us. And this is why design is of such huge importance in what we do. Now, when I say design, I don't mean aesthetics. I mean holistic design. Everything from the design of your organization up. If you design your organization incorrectly, you will never be able to design the products that you want to design. If you have a social mission, you won't be able to keep to that social mission. So let's take a look at how we do design today in Silicon Valley. What does Silicon Valley design look like? It looks something like this. On a timeline from now to the future, we're creating amazing products that empower you. They're convenient, they're delightful. When you look someplace up on Google Maps and you find it, that empowers you, that gets you to where you want to be. That is awesome. It respects the experience. And if you think about it, our lives are just a string of experiences, right? And then we die. So the quality of those experiences really matter. So we do that right. But what's the cost? Oh, the cost is ubiquitous surveillance. The cost is an erosion of your human rights. So in the future, we're faced with eroded civil liberties and eroded democracy. Quite a cost that perhaps we're not actually aware of getting into that barter that we're getting into, because it is an invisible barter. So this is design without ethics. And that is manipulation. All design, to some degree, is manipulation. But design without ethics is dark design. And I would go further than that. I would not call this design at all. This is decoration. Decoration is what makes the status quo palatable. Design is what alters it. So today, the brand of design that we practice is colonialist in nature. It's ethnographic. We design for the other, whether the other is people in our own communities that are different to us, or quite possibly the next 5 billion who are hugely different to us. So we must study them. Just like you do, we do design research, right? We study the other, these weird and unusual creatures that we need to exploit in some way for our profit motive. Now, you might think that I'm a little overboard in my characterization of this. You would be wrong. Here's one of the most successful books in Silicon Valley today. It's called Hooked. The byline, if you can't see it there, says, "How to Build Habit-Forming Products." So the book is about how to get people, now we call them users, you might have heard. There are only 2 industries in the world that call the people who use their products users. One are drug dealers, the other is us. And here you can see it illustrated. How do we addict people to our products? Why do we need to addict them? Because of our business model. The more they use them, the more information they reveal about themselves, the more money we make. It's very simple. You know, you don't need conspiracy theories when you have the beautiful simplicity of business models. So this I would call evil. Or, as the book's website says, the book everyone in Silicon Valley is talking about. But we have a response to this, so don't worry. Free and open source, right? To the rescue. Now, here's what free and open source design looks like. Again, on the same timeline, with free and open source, we say, hey, folks, you know what? We have got your human rights covered. We have got your liberties covered. Use our products. And then when people say, we can't use your products, they're too darn hard to use, we say, pull requests are welcome, right? So we fail on the other end of the spectrum. And there's a reason why we do that. The cost, of course, in all of this is convenience and the immediate experience. Now, to say to someone, forego your immediate experience because we are protecting your rights in the long term is hugely arrogant because, again, experiences matter. And this might be as crucial as someone not being able to use your product, someone who has an accessibility need, for example. So they can't benefit from it even if they wanted to. And the problem is this. It's very simple. We, in our roles as enthusiasts, are creating products for ourselves, and then we're assuming that they will magically trickle down into products that will be usable by people in their roles as regular, everyday people using regular, everyday things. I won't use the term consumer because I think we can be better than that. I think we can be citizens, not just consumers. So I call this trickle-down technology. And just like trickle-down economics, it does not work. We're not even designing for the everyday things. We are designing for ourselves as enthusiasts. Those are 2 hugely separate worlds. Let me illustrate. Let's say you have a car that you drive to work every day. This is an everyday thing. It gets a job done. If this car breaks down, you get angry because you just want it to work because it means you're late for work. You don't care how this car works as long as it works and it gets you there. But you, the same person, might have another car, a classic car that you love. You love to work on this car. Maybe you built that car from scratch. You know everything about that car, or you want to. Now, when that car breaks down, you are ecstatic. You are so happy because it means that you get to spend the weekend working on what you love. In the free and open source world, we build for this and expect it to be a great use case for the car you want to drive to work every day. And then we get surprised when it's not. It's not that we can't build great things. We're just building them for a different audience. So what's the solution? Well, there's a third way. I call it ethical design. With ethical design, we can create beautiful products that empower you in the here and now that don't then erode your human rights. And what's the cost? Quite a simple thing. It's either money, or if it helps the commons, for example, then maybe we can pay for it out of the commons as well. But here's how it looks. So I've taken Maslow's hierarchy of needs and used it for my purposes here. At the core in ethical design, at its base, we must respect human rights. So we build things that are private, secure, accessible, and sustainable because we respect human rights. Now, we can't stop there. The next step is to build things that respect human effort. Do you see a pattern forming? So things that are functional, convenient, and reliable so that people get immediate utility from them. And then we don't have to stop there. We can go further. We can build things that are delightful, that respect the human experience. It all comes down to respect for the human. All ours are the same thing. And here's where we're failing today. We build things that don't respect human rights. And when we do that, we're not building products for people. We're building products on the backs of people. And that's the technology landscape that we have today. It's not too much of a stretch to say that most mainstream technology today is malware. And if we don't like that, we need to think about how we're going to change that. To change it, we need to move beyond the clouds, beyond the web. We think of the web as decentralized. It's not. It's centralized. It just has many centers. If there are economies of scale for those centers to scale vertically, they will, and they will coalesce until we get the monopolies that we have today. The web is not broken. The web is functioning beautifully as designed. It was designed as a centralized system, and there was probably an impetus mismatch with its philosophy. So we need a new topology if we're going to fix this problem. A new topology without privileged centers. An egalitarian topology. And that is what a decentralized topology is. In effect, for example, where Facebook says, hey, share your photo with me if you want to share it with your friend, we simply say, in independent technology, just share your photo with your friend. We don't even want to know. At its core, it's really this simple. And this is the core of what I call independent technology and the initiative that I lead with my tiny social enterprise, currently based in Brighton, but which is leaving the UK thanks to some of you electing David Cameron and thereby making it impossible for us to stay and build a secure messaging system. So thank you, guys, those of you that did. But what are the principles? Quite simply, we need to be independently funded. If we take venture capital, we've already lost control. We need to be sustainable. The only answer to the excessive greed and short-sightedness and that toxic business model of Silicon Valley cannot be charities or governments. We can build sustainable businesses. It has to be designed for the whole term, ethical design. It has to be distributed or decentralized in topology. And it needs to be free, as in liberty, so that you don't have to trust the systems we build. You can independently verify them. And it should be made by diverse teams designing for themselves so we don't fall into the trap of ethnographic design. Because I'm a young to middle-aged white guy, and I can't change that. What I can do is make sure that my design team is as diverse as possible, and thereby, by designing for ourselves, we end up designing for as diverse an audience as possible. That is the opposite of ethnographic design. Now, if you want to learn more about this, there is a manifesto at ind.ie/manifesto. But I want to do something that I haven't done before. I don't just talk about this. We're actually building a platform, and it's called Heartbeat. And this is actually the first time I'm publicly showing any screenshots from it, apart from our private alpha. It's a beautiful, gorgeous experience where you can see me right now having a conversation with a parrot and a penguin, as you do. Those are in 3 different virtual machines, and that's happening entirely privately through a peer-to-peer file synchronization service where every message is written out as a tiny little snippet of HTML and any attachments that are attached to it, and then very efficiently synced between our devices directly. And if we want to make something public, that's served via a web server, and that gives you your own independent web location as well. And it's very easy to get started. That's the beautiful thing about it. It has to be convenient. So to fix this problem, we must move beyond centralization. We must move beyond venture capital as the only way of doing things. We must move beyond making heroes out of Silicon Valley. And we really need to move beyond colonialism in our design. It kind of comes down to moving beyond privilege and embracing equality. Really, this is what we need to move beyond: bullshit. Because let me tell you what we've done. We've planted a bullshit seed. And we got a bullshit tree. And then we climbed up into the branches, and now we're wondering why the fruit tastes like bullshit. Now, there's a reason for that. That's the only type of fruit that you can get from a bullshit tree. Now, some of us that benefit from this system think that if we decorate the tree, it will mask the taste of the fruit. But decorating a tree does not mask the taste of the fruit. Some of us who see the problem feel that we can fix it by pruning some of the branches, but that does not change the nature of the tree. So here's what I think we should do. I think we should get down from this tree. Some of us, not all of us, it's fine, some of us, walk a few steps to one side and plant a new seed grounded in reason, sustainability, equality, democracy, and human rights. Then we will get a very different type of tree. One that we don't have to decorate because it will be beautiful, because it is based on those principles. And the fruits that we get will be diverse. But we can't stop there. It's crucial that we build a bridge between our tree and the bullshit tree to enable people who want to join us, to give them a convenient means to come and join us. Because that is the bridge between the centralized world of old and the decentralized world that we are building. A world built on reason, on equality, on human rights, and on democracy. That is the world that I want to live in. That is the world that I believe we deserve, and that is the world that I challenge us to build. Thank you. Thanks.